Sahabat semua, and good morning, everybody. My wife always tells me, my wife is an Indonesianist as well, Nancy Smith Hefner, and my wife always tells me whenever you meet anybody, never tell them how old you are, because age doesn't give you any benefit anymore. It used to, no, it doesn't. So, but I have to say, well, it's actually been more than 30 years. I first went to Indonesia in 1977 to study the Bahasa Indonesia, the advanced program in Malang, Egypt, Malang. So I go back more than 40 years. Indonesia is itu bagian dari saya. And then secondly, I underscore that by saying Indonesia is not just an interesting democracy. It is a great country. It is a great democracy. At a time of democratic regression in many parts of the world, Indonesia remains exemplary. It is a great country politically, culturally, and of course in its ability to unite the more than 700, or by some counts, 1,100 ethnic groups that make up this great country. So at any rate, what I'm going to present today, I have to be quick, is about 20 minutes of reflection on the kind of message that I convey when I'm speaking to people who don't know a lot about Indonesia. Decline in the quality of democracy in Western nations, as well as in many of the nations of the global South. The political analyst, who some of you perhaps know, Larry Diamond, has observed that we live in an age of global democratic decline. And again, he's emphasizing not just in the global South, but in the nations of Western Europe and the United States. Larry Diamond is the leading political theorist of democracy of our era, and has noticed this very severe decline. But this global regression in the quality of democracy in so many lands around the world is what makes Indonesia so remarkable and important. Indonesia, I always underscore, is a striking exception to these downward democratic trends. It is, of course, as you all know, the most populous Muslim majority country in the world. But it's also a country that has preserved its course of democratic transition, consolidated democracy, and proved itself the best democracy of the 49 OIC countries, Organization of Islamic Conference, and without question, the strongest democracy in Asia, and I would say in all of Asia. It is a remarkable record of success, a striking exception, the global declining democracy about which Larry Diamond and others have spoken. And that's what I want to talk about today. How is this? Go back to my earlier question. In other words, lay in the fact that beginning in the 1990s, in the 1980s, a generation of public intellectuals, especially Muslim public intellectuals, like my friend, Jokowi Shimaji, the late Jokowi Shimaji, Mas Dawan Berharjo, another friend, Abdurrahman Wahid, I won't call him a friend, but he was a friend. I was a follower, so to speak. It was people like these that created a kind of coalitional structure linking democratic ideals and ideals of conclusive citizenship to mass-based social organizations that created the real pillars for Indonesia's successful and remarkable return to democracy in 1998-99. Well before the great political changes of the Reformasi era, in other words, then leaders in organizations like NU and Muhammadiyah began working in conjunction with the state, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Religion, and the State Islamic University system, another pillar of Indonesian democracy and religious reform. It was these groups that worked together to establish a broad public consensus in Indonesian society on the idea that democracy and multi-religious citizenship are not merely acceptable, but they are the best realization of Islamic values. There's the distinctiveness of its Muslim educators and its Muslim leadership. In Indonesia, from the late 1980s on, Muslim scholars associated with the State Islamic University system but also with Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah jointly crafted educational programs to provide specifically Islamic rationale in support of the principles of Pancasila pluralism and Indonesian democracy. A remarkable achievement, and one that again stands in contrast with the friction that similar efforts experience in places like Jordan and Syria or Pakistan. In the claims of Western secularization theory a generation ago, Indonesia shows that a high wall of separation between religion and state is not necessary to make democracy work in an inclusive and equal way. Indonesia has shown that you don't have to follow. I'm an American, I'm proud to be American, but you don't have to follow. And indeed, in a country like Indonesia, you don't want to follow the American pattern of erecting a high wall of separation between religion and state. I would point out that such a high wall of separation, which Americans sometimes assume is required for democracy, was not the operative principle of state and religion relations in most of Western Europe as they became democratic in the late 19th and early 20th century. Indeed, the models of democratic and religious interaction in most of Western Europe look not like the United States, they look like Indonesia. They look like Indonesia. So again, all this is to say that this kind of, the assumption that there has to be a high wall of separation is wrong, and Indonesia has proved that in fact, in creating a kind of synergy and collaboration between state and religious actors, not only can you promote ethical values in society, but you can reform religious traditions in a way that they become positive resources for democracy and citizen inclusivity. There too is the remarkable achievement, the remarkable greatness of Indonesia. Whether in Indonesia or other Muslim-majority lands, however, this aspiration to realize religious values, to recognize that religious values are a public good, which they are, it should be, can face the test. Foremost among these is the test or the question of just which values, which understanding of Islam, which understanding of religion are most relevant for a shared national life, and who has the authority to decide what those religious values, public religious values are. But here again is precisely on this point, the achievements of Indonesian democracy and Pancasila citizenship again shine so brightly. The trademark characteristic of Indonesian democracy is that it seeks to promote democracy and Pancasila pluralism, not just because these modern values, these are modern and democratic values, but because those same values are actually good for democracy. They strengthen democracy and citizen inclusivity. As Nurul Majid and Abdul Hanahi so regularly emphasized in their conversations that we had for many years ago, democracy and Pancasila citizenship are good for Muslims and good for Islam, as well as being good for the Indonesian nation. To borrow a phrase from the Harvard political philosopher Marianne Glendon, who's been to Indonesia, doesn't speak Indonesian, but she's a leading political theorist and someone who has been absolutely transfixed by Indonesia and by Indonesia's achievements. She was at the R20 meeting in Bali 2 years ago. To borrow a phrase from Marianne Glendon, all this is to say that Indonesian democracy is not so much a secular liberal democracy premised on individual autonomy as it is, I like her phrase, it's a dignitarian democracy. It's a dignitarian rather than a Western individualist democracy that assumes you have to privatize religion. Religion has no relevance for public life. Indonesia shows there is another model. It's a model that's deeply relevant for many other nations, both Muslim majority and others. I would end my discussion today with 3 quick summary observations, 3 quick points. For a democratic culture to take root and flourish, I have tried to suggest that it cannot simply be imported from outside or borrowed from the West or the United States. That's not how democracy works. It has to build on local resources. It has to munggali, it has to dig deep into local culture and society, and that's what Indonesia has done. That's my second point. It's not only is that, but all democracies do. Indonesia has succeeded because the democracy that it has developed is a democracy that's rooted in the deepest and most cherished values of Indonesian society. People of all faiths, but the deeply cherished and most resonant values of Muslim society. It's Muslim society in Indonesia. Second, what is so remarkable about Indonesia, my second point, concluding point, is that it has done just that. It's brought Indonesian cultural values and this synonymous practice in Indonesia into the task of making democracy work, and that's why democracy has worked. Whereas in the majority of OIC countries, sadly, it is not. Third and last, it is the scaling up of democracy from deeply rooted local Indonesian culture and religious values. It's this scaling up that has ensured that in an age of global democratic regression, the theme with which I began, Indonesian democracy remains a shining example to the world, an example of success. And it is one that, in my opinion, there's many naysayers. I read some political science journals, political science journals from Australia, and it sounds as if Indonesia is in deep, deep trouble. I think not. I think democracy is consolidated and well, and it is going to endure in Indonesia, even in an age where democracy is being subjected to tests and challenges in many parts of the world, including my own United States. Last sentence. Indonesia has proved itself in all these regards that I've emphasized today. It's proved itself a great democracy, and it's proved itself, not just that, a great nation with a great, diverse national culture. It offers lessons on religion and democracy that are a blessing, a rahmat, not just for Indonesia's citizens, but for all of humanity. Thank you.